Just when we thought things couldn't get any more disastrous and chaotic at Chelsea, we have the cherry on top, the absolute cluster storm that the last few years have been, because now we have infighting among owners. Behdad Eghbali and Todd Boehly do not like each other, and while this wasn't the biggest secret in the world, it is now playing out in the public forum, which is an utter disaster. However, if you are a fan, if you support a club that could use a new owner, this might work out really well for you, because Todd Boehly could be in the market for another team, and I'm going to argue that that's something you should be rooting for. We're going to break it down next here on Pints and Punditry at the Pitchside Pub. No, this isn't clickbait. I am actually going to make an argument that there are fans of some clubs out there that should be rooting for Todd Boehly to sell his stake in Chelsea and buy their club, and I gotta tell you, I am as surprised as you are that I'm making this argument, but here we are. We've had some developments, and the more I've thought about this over the weekend, the more I think it might work out really well for some fan base. Now, we're going to go way down the what-if rabbit hole here and talk about a lot of long-shot possibilities, but there is a non-zero chance that everything I'm going to say could play out. So we're going to break it all down here next in just a second, but before we do, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me down below so you can follow the channel. Get down in that comment section. What do you think? Am I way off my rocker? Do you not want Boehly anywhere near your club? Who is your club? Who are some options that this could play out for? Get in that comment section. Let me know what you think. You can also leave some comments on Twitter at PitchsidePub and check out the website pitchsidepub.com. So the development recently is that Todd Boehly, who owns a 13% stake of Chelsea, and Behdad Eghbali, who is the representative of Clearlake Capital, who owns 61.5% of Chelsea, do not like each other. And this is not really new news. There have been lots of sort of rumblings that the two, have, the quote professional relationship, which is, media speak for they don't like each other, but they get along because they have to work together. And anybody who's ever worked in an office has somebody like that who you maintain a professional relationship with, but you don't really like them. And when you no longer work there, you'll never talk to them again. And that's just people being people, right? So this isn't all that shocking. But when it is the representatives of a multi-billion-dollar football club with fans around the world, obviously the stakes are higher and it plays out in a much more public fashion. And for whatever reason, when Clearlake Capital bought Chelsea, they decided that Todd Boehly was going to be more of the front-facing figure. And I would venture to say that most fans, even most Chelsea fans, and certainly most neutrals, did not realize that Todd Boehly only owned 13%. Now, I will admit, I didn't know it was that low. I knew he was not a majority owner, but I did not realize it was that low. So that's really interesting, and you have to assume that part of that is because he does have previous sports ownership. He is also a part owner of the Los Angeles Dodgers, and when you look at what Chelsea is doing, their whole MO has been exploiting loopholes, and that is the Todd Boehly system, right? And he did this with the Dodgers, offering massive deferred payments to get players in, and the payments for Dodgers players will probably be paid out long after he sells his stake in the team, and it's not his problem anymore. And so Todd Boehly, for all of his flaws, and he does have many, he is sort of a loophole genius. And he analyzes the rules, and he finds ways around them. Now, does that make him a likable guy? No, not particularly. And it does, and I have talked repeatedly on this channel about how Chelsea is sort of, taking the soul of the club away and treating players just like saleable assets and business pieces. And there is some truth to that. However, the development is it seems that perhaps Boehly was not the man behind as much of this as we thought, and that a lot of the blame goes to the Clearlake folks. And that's a really interesting development. Now, again, them exploiting the loopholes has Todd Boehly written all over, right? And by the loopholes, the primary one is the 7-year contract that they're giving everybody. Because of the way amortization works, and the way it is calculated through PSR, clubs get to divide the transfer fee that they pay for these players over the length of the contract. So when you make it 7 or 8 or 9 years, It costs a lot less per year, and thus you can bring in more players. It's sort of genius. It obviously has some inherent risk. You are extending players well into their prime, sometimes past their prime. You don't know if all these players are going to hit, and you could be on the hook for some really bad contracts down the road. But this is the same exact thing he did with the Dodgers. He signs players to massive contracts, and Major League Baseball allows you to defer salary payments long after the players have stopped playing. So you can sign a player to a 10-year contract for $250 million, but spread that money out over the next 30 years. They let you do that. They shouldn't, but they let you. And that's the Todd Boehly system, finding the rules that shouldn't be there, but are allowed, and exploiting them. So that part has Boehly written all over it. But what has come out, and again, we have to take all of this with a grain of salt, right? I obviously have no inside information, but you can sort of dissect media reports and figure out where there's some truth and where there's not. And the most interesting thing that has come out is that it is the Clearlake folks who wanted to go youth. And it was Todd Boehly who wanted to have a mix of veterans and young players and didn't necessarily have a preference on building around youth the way the Clearlake folks did. And again, if we look back to his time with the Dodgers, that has been the case. He traded for Mookie Betts. He traded for Mookie Betts, signed Freddie Freeman, signed Shohei Ohtani. These are all players in the heart of their prime. Now, I'm not expecting my football fans to know a lot about this, but take me at my word. That's been the strategy. It was not building around youth. It was implementing youth in and around expensive veterans that only the Dodgers could afford. That's probably what Boehly wanted to do at Chelsea. In fact, that's what reports are suggesting he wanted to do, and yet he was overridden by the Clearlake consortium, who wanted to go youth because they saw the young players as growth potential. And they're not wrong in that, but if you want to win football games, that's not going to go well when your entire team is 22 and below. Not when you want to win it at the level that Chelsea does. I understand when smaller clubs do this sort of thing and they want to build a young nucleus. In fact, I often root for that and argue that it should happen. But when you are trying to compete for the league title and you need to be in the Champions League every year, that's not going to get it done. And you do have to sprinkle in some veterans, and they really have not. So what we're seeing play out in the media is apparently that Boehly wanted a nice mix, and the Clearlake group wanted all these young players because they're the ones with the most growth potential in front of them financially, and they ultimately won. And it makes sense because they have the majority stake, and they get more of a say. And so it does make you want to believe what it is we're reading. I do believe it because I've seen what Boehly does in other sports. I've seen how he understands, sports at least. I don't think he has a great grasp of European football. I think he's trying to implement things he has done successfully in other sports to European football. And some of it will work and some of it will not. It is very easy to underestimate the emotional connection of the fan base and the tribalism in English football in particular. And that is not something that we have necessarily in America, particularly in baseball. It may have been 50 years ago. Now you get it a little bit in the NFL, but we do not get it in baseball, particularly in a massive, massive city like the Dodgers. And that's a team that relocated there in the 1950s. And so it's the tribalism and the dedication there is not the same. If you win in LA, the fans will come out and they'll love the new guys and it won't matter. Well, that's not the same in European football. It doesn't work that way. I hope that's a lesson Todd Boehly is learning as he plans his next move, because that's the part he got wrong. But his approach, if he really did want a more balanced roster and was planning on spending and wanted a better fit of players, well, that's actually pretty intriguing. That could have done some really positive things at Chelsea had he been allowed to do that. Now, I still don't love the risk of all the 7-year contracts, although if you've got enough money to pull it off and absorb some of the risk in the players that don't work out, then I suppose it's not as risky. It's more risky for a guy like me. I couldn't do it, but it's not risky when you're Todd Boehly. But his plan seems to have had more validity to it than we realized, and we have been knocking Chelsea now for 2 years, myself included, and we have all sort of just knocked Todd Boehly by default, right? As the head guy, as the figurehead for this ridiculous Chelsea operation, we've sort of put all the blame on him. And it now appears that maybe it wasn't all him. And maybe he wanted to do things a little bit differently and was, overridden by the Clearlake group who wanted to do things their way. And because they owned a higher majority stake, they decided to do things the way they wanted, and Boehly was just sitting there wearing it, and his reputation's getting crushed, which is part of why he wants a change, and he wants Clearlake out. Clearlake wants him out, and that's the development that has happened. The two sides, the Clearlake wants to buy Boehly out. It's his 13% and change, which, according to most valuations, would come out to about 400 million pounds. Most valuations have Chelsea at around 3.1 million pounds or euros, depending on whose scale you're looking at. And he owns 13% of that. So let's say that's 400,000. Well, they want to buy him out, and they'll be able to raise the funds for that because they're a massive investment fund. Boehly said, well, hang on a second. Why do I have to go? I want to buy you guys out. Well, that's cute, Todd. That's going to be a little bit tougher because he's going to have to come up with about 2 billion pounds to pull that off. And he says he can do it. He says he can raise the funds, but that may be a bit of a pipe dream. And if he does, he's still not going to have the majority ownership stake in the club that he owns. So while he's talking a big game and he's fighting the good fight, that doesn't feel as realistic. So let's make a couple of assumptions here. Let's make the assumption that ultimately Todd Boehly is going to lose this battle because Clearlake has tons of money and the ability to raise more money. And so ultimately, Clearlake buys Todd Boehly out. Let's just assume that that's going to happen. Again, we're going down the rabbit hole of what ifs here, and there's a domino effect, and we're making a lot of assumptions, but I feel like they're all semi-realistic. So let's say Clearlake buys him out, Todd Boehly gets roughly 400 million pounds for his share of Chelsea. Good for him. He's a very wealthy man. Now, he could just say, you know what? I tried the football thing. England, you guys are crazy. I don't want any part of you. I'm done. I'm going to go back to baseball. And we'll never hear from Todd Boehly again, at least in the footballing world, and so be it. However, he seems to like this. He seems to want to be involved. And so would it be a stretch for him to go buy a team of his own? He's got 400 million in his pocket, which could buy him pretty much any team in the championship. It could buy him a team, about half of Serie A, could buy him about half of La Liga. He couldn't go to the Bundesliga because they've got different ownership structures, but France, he could take a John Textor approach and go buy other clubs. He also can raise more money. I'm not doubting his ability to raise money. I'm doubting his ability to raise $2 million. But he's going to want a majority ownership stake in whatever club he buys. Well, if he's got 400 million pounds in his pocket, that means he could raise another 400 million and still be the majority owner. We're just using round numbers. But let's say he's got the buying power of around 800 million. Well, that could get you some Premier League clubs. In fact, there's one quite historic Premier League club that can't seem to find an owner, and that's Everton. And they don't cost $800 million. The valuation of Everton, particularly with all the debt they have hanging over their head, is not $800 million. He could almost buy that outright. He'd probably need to raise a little bit of investment and probably would want to just for the sake of diversifying and protecting himself. But he could absolutely buy Everton. If he sells his stake in Chelsea, he could go buy Everton without even breaking a sweat trying to raise a few extra 100 million pounds and raise that money. Is that good? Everton fans, is that something you want? Get in that comment section, let me know. Given your troubles finding a manager or finding an owner, that's not a bad scenario, right? Todd Boehly seems to have a decent approach. He definitely wants to spend money. Your financial woes would be gone, right? He is willing to raise the money. He probably would find another half a billion dollars of investors just to help pay off Everton's debt, but he could probably buy your way out of that. I don't know that he'd come in and splash the cash on players immediately the way, because of the debt, the way he did at Chelsea, but he would soon. He's clearly a guy who wants to invest in his clubs. You could do worse, particularly if you buy the assumption that the ridiculous amount of transfers and the intense focus on young players and the depth chart that has 50 guys on it, if you buy that that's all a Clearlake thing and not a Boehly thing, all of a sudden you could do a lot worse than Todd Boehly. There's some clubs in the championship that have really questionable ownership situations and would love to see their owners sell and would love somebody who's willing to come in and spend the money to get their club to the Premier League. We could be looking at a Wrexham situation, but on a larger scale, right? He's not going to go buy a National League club. He could buy the entire National League for about 10 times over, probably, for what he's going to make selling his stake in Chelsea. But on a smaller scale, buying a championship level club, investing in them the way we're seeing with Birmingham City, investing in that and trying to get them to the Premier League. There's a lot of scenarios here that could play out. He could go multi-ownership the way Clearlake has and buy a championship level club and a French club and a Belgian club and do that sort of thing. There's a lot of possibilities here, but I think a lot of these clubs that need an owner who's willing to spend money could do a lot worse than Todd Boehly now that we know certain things. And I will say, I am believing what I'm reading. Again, I have no proof. I'm not in there. But I have a pretty long track record of dissecting what the media writes. And sometimes it's completely bogus. And sometimes there's some validity to it. And this feels, just my hunch, this feels like one that has some validity. I know Todd Boehly's going to try and buy his way into the majority ownership at Chelsea. I don't see that happening. That is a lot of money to raise, and Clearlake doesn't seem to want to give in, so he can't force them. I think ultimately he will try and fail at that, and then he will end up selling his stake sometime in the next year, and then he will look to buy another club, at which point, the way Everton's going, it could still be available. I'm not saying it's going to be them. They're just the most obvious candidate sitting in the Premier League, at least for now, but I could also see him buying a club in the Championship, investing a lot of money, and then making himself once again a Premier League owner, but this time a majority owner. That's my sort of semi-prediction here. I don't say it with a lot of confidence, but I do say it in the fact that it's a non-zero chance. All of this could play out this way. A lot of dominoes have to fall, a lot of predictions would have to go right, but that is an actual possibility. And I think a lot of clubs would be lucky to have Todd Boehly as their owner, given their current situations and given what we now know about Boehly. But what do you think? That's what I'd like to know. Get down in that comment section. Let me know what you think. Who is your club, and would you like Boehly to own them? Or do you want no part of this guy? You're not believing what you're reading. You don't want any part of it. You don't want to be another Chelsea. Or would you even be another Chelsea if you had Todd Boehly? Or would things go different? So many parts to this. Get down in that comment section. Let me know what you think. You can also leave comments on Twitter at PitchsidePub. While you're at it, hit that subscribe button for me down below so you can follow the channel and check out the website pitchsidepub.com. Thanks as always for joining us here on Pints and Punditry at the Pitchside Pub.